In 2017, I did the first talk on Micro-Frontends. There, basically, I had 30 minutes talk and 6 hours questions with the people. And since then, I understood that I was sitting something very interesting. I designed an architecture, distributed architecture, and magically all my problems will disappear. That is absolutely absurd. It's not going to happen.
Hi, I'm Ayomide. Very nice to meet you. Luca, we have Luca in the house. Do you just want to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Luca Mezzalira. I'm a several specialist solution architect in AWS, published author with O'Reilly, and an international speaker.
I just want to know a little bit about you. I know I've seen you on YouTube, I've seen you on LinkedIn, so many other places, but I want to get to know about your hobbies. So what are your hobbies? What are you into?
Hobbies. Tech is my hobby to a certain extent. So in the last 24 years almost, I basically studied because for me, it's fun studying new frameworks. Depends from the part of my career I was in, but sometimes was a new programming language, sometimes was architecture, sometimes was something else. In the past 2 years, although, I started to study videography. I found it extremely fulfilling overall because I'm basically layering up my tech capabilities and knowledge, and I express myself through videos, trying to do cinematic videos that are sometimes challenging. But in the last 2 years, I'm quite happy with the result that I reached. Obviously, still a lot of room of improvements, but I have to say the knowledge that I have about cameras and how to record. I shoot also in different countries, also US, in Boston. I did that for, let's say, a specific conference. So in general, I started to become more proficient, and I enjoy a lot that part.
That's really amazing. Seeing you go, kind of use what you have in tech and then transition into videography and all that. It's really nice. I just want to get into it. You mentioned something about a little bit about your background there, and I know you are well known for Moldova Federation and things like that. How did you get into that?
10 years ago, I was working for a company called DAZN, that is a live sports streaming platform. And I was the second tech person hired. And at the time, we have a challenge that we need to migrate from a monolith that was on the back end and monolith on the front that was single-page application to something that was scalable for having tens of teams working alongside on the same project. On the back end, we had a clear path because as an architect, I said, okay, we can go with microservices. It's no-brainer. With front-end, we didn't have a possibility or an idea. I knew because we reached a tipping point that we were 30 front-end developers working on the front-end. Everything started to slow down. And even if we start from scratch, the problem wouldn't fade away because at some point you reach a tipping point in general in software that in order to maintain a cohesive code base and coherent code base, you tend to invest a lot of time on practices, refactoring, stuff like that without delivering new features. So we have to reshape the way how we were doing front-end. So at some point while I was traveling to Tokyo for work, I was thinking, okay, well, what make microservices so special? And then I started to say, okay, let's forget about the technology part. Let's focus on the principles. So usually microservice can be independently deployable. If it fails in isolation. You have a bunch of characteristics. Yeah. And then I started to apply that on the front end. So that trip that I was doing other things for work, in my spare time was thinking about this. So at the end of the trip, I came back in London with this idea of what if I create a POC that belonged to the ideas that I have while in Tokyo. And that basically was the genesis of Micro-Frontends. Yeah. Since then, we try out with our team, and with 3 people, we were able to deliver a chunk of the system was the catalog. That was a key part of a live sports streaming platform in 4 different devices plus web in 3 weeks. and it has, let's say, 80% of the capabilities of the let's say the system in production, but it was missing all the rest, obviously, because it was just a POC. So that proved that we could do that, and it worked way better, especially on low-end devices, because majority of the time people were consuming content on low-end devices where every byte matters and every object in memory matters. Therefore, we need to be extremely careful how to handle that. But thanks to Micro-Frontends, because you're loading only what is needed and not much more than that, we were capable to do something extremely cool that if a user was authenticated, will never download SDKs from, I don't know, PayPal or any other payment methods, because you're already authenticated, you don't need that. And thanks to this approach, we, let's say, reached some KPIs that we didn't expect, like starting of the application in, 10 milliseconds instead of 40 milliseconds on 20, old device like a Fire TV stick and stuff like that. And just with this split. And when it started to apply to the web, it was even more powerful because now the team are completely autonomous. We started to first stay more coarse-grained and then splitting up and more granular when was needed. Because very often people think that if you do Micro-Frontends, you have the similar approach of components and you just load runtime. That is a recipe for destroying everything that you have created. In reality, Micro-Frontends, you need to look into the domains that you need to identify inside the system, like you would do with microservices, and then starting more coarse-grained and slowly but steadily decide if you want to go more fine-grained. And that was for us a great thing. Fact is that I met one of my principal engineers back in the days, literally this year. So 8 years later, he told me that the architecture that we designed back in the days is still serving the purpose. They didn't change anything. They evolved constantly the platform, but without having the architecture in the middle. And that for me is the testimony that well-designed system can really last, let's say, the time needed in order to evolve without any problem.
Wow, that's amazing. Like that's something like I think a lot of people are trying to kind of get into Micro-Frontends now. There's a lot of resources out there, but like you said, you need to do it right.
Correct.
Otherwise, it's like the foundation. Everything else kind of crumbles. Like, what would you say is like back then, 10 years ago, when you were thinking about this? What was like the biggest challenge, and what was like the biggest challenge you see now in kind of Micro-Frontends?
So 10 years ago, the main problem, there wasn't anyone doing that at scale. There was some bits and bobs in different companies, like Zalando was doing something, but it was very specific to Zalando. So when I was doing these things, I realized how powerful, because I waited 2 years before I have enough data points to present outside. So in 2017, I did the first talk on Micro-Frontends. There, basically, I had 30 minutes talk and 6 hours questions with the people. It was incredible how they received the talk. And since then, I understood that I was sitting something very interesting. So I started to spend more time rationalizing, testing out, and I built with the community basically a lot of assumption patterns, whatever, based on their requests. Very often, you need to remove the emotional side on how they were communicating and trying to focus, okay, what is really trying to say this person? Maybe there is a problem that I can solve in somehow. And over the years, let's say I spent countless hours and days and weeks on sorting out common problems on Micro-Frontends till I arrived today with clear patterns and heuristics that I can recommend to any companies. And in the last 4 years in AWS, I worked with roughly 100 teams between internal teams in Amazon and AWS, as well as customers from New Zealand to Silicon Valley on migrating to Micro-Frontends. And I apply these heuristics and this pattern that I created over the years. And I refine them, I make them more sharp, and now I have like a very clear idea how to do things. And we succeeded majority of the times. Obviously, there are certain problems that are mainly bureaucracy and organization structure that I cannot influence too much. But majority of the time, I always try to look into this triangle in general when I design architecture, that is thinking about architecture as enablement for organization structure and engineering culture. But these three elements are linked together. So you cannot think about, oh, I design an architecture, I don't know, a distributed architecture like microservices or micro-frontends, and magically all my problems will disappear. That is absolutely absurd. It's not going to happen, because unless you decentralize also the decision-making, you reassess the teams, you reassess who is owning what, it's not going to work. These generate friction, and then the blame goes usually to architecture. While the architecture is just doing its job, like raising friction in the trenches to telling you something doesn't work. But the natural thing is that we never think, oh no, it's a human problem. While in majority of the time it is. It's how you structure the things, how the communication flows inside the teams. And the architecture is just raising the friction to show that somewhere in the system, something doesn't work. But you need to look not only on the tech side, but also on the engineering culture side, how fast, for instance, you reach the deployment, or what is your testing strategies. And also on the organizational side, are we structured properly? Are we assigned the boundaries of a system properly to a single team that is independent, or they have too many external dependencies? All these kind of things require a different approach from the normal way how you build an application with React, Angular, whatever, because many of these technical decisions are belonging to the technical side. That's pretty much it. No one is talking about engineering culture on how you build a React application. When you think about a distributed system, you have to, because we have seen in the microservices world, you need to have platform engineering. You need to talk about team topologies. You need to think about domain-driven design. And those things makes successful a distributed system. It's not that because it's front end, oh, now suddenly we think about only React or Angular or whatever.
Yeah, that's very true. I've seen that in teams where like they're adopting micro-frontend. Obviously, they need to have like a platform engineering layer. They need to like do kind of domain-driven designs and things like that, which is very critical. I think one question I have is around the teams specifically. Like obviously for moving from like monolith to like a micro-frontend approach, like you usually get maybe senior principal engineers and all that. But how do you kind of transition from that role of being like a senior principal engineer, a software architect or a senior software architect? What's it like?
So the challenge overall is that you need to get out of your comfort zone, that you like it or not. I'm not a big believer in titles or roles. You do what is needed to be done. In general, very often in the last 15 years, I found myself in stepping up in roles that weren't, let's say, designed for me, but then I demonstrated I was able to do that, and then I was promoted even. In this case, the important part from a team perspective is trying to influence the right people in the right way, because usually a principal engineer cannot influence directly the organization structure, although can create a lot of data points to influence the right people, engineering manager, VP, or etc., to help them rationalizing that there is friction that has to be addressed. Classic example is I need to deploy Micro-Frontends, but every time I need to coordinate with other 3 teams. That is a clear signal that the boundaries are not well defined, or you went to granular, or you assign, let's say, randomly Micro-Frontends to people without understanding how the domain would look like, and very often happens. Now, the challenge there is if you start to say, oh, when I deploy something that is inside my Micro-Frontends, I can deploy multiple times per day. But when I have to define something that is happening, I don't know, 3 times per month, with coordinating with other teams, usually our throughput and flow start to have like some friction, natural friction. And those are things for me, when I was in my previous company, I was checking almost daily. So there was a rule that if a pipeline takes more than 15 times, you stop anything that you are building inside the team till the pipeline is fixed. Because the problem I had was too often I work as developer in companies where they design a CI/CD. It takes, at the beginning, obviously, everything works fine. And then suddenly you arrive at some point in the life cycle of a software that takes 45 minutes.
Crazy, yeah.
And what you do when you are a developer waiting 45 minutes is like you think about other stuff, you like scroll on social, you go take a coffee, wherever it is, right? That you forgot a lot of the stuff. If you're capable to have a fast CI/CD, you can enforce certain behaviors. Like, for instance, I remember when we started to see that the budget size of a Micro-Frontend start to increase randomly because people forget about maybe to set tree shaking or other stuff, I had to figure out something. And that something became that every time that a team open a PR to merge in main, we run a Git hook and we spin up a Lambda function where Chromium was running. We build on the fly the Webpack was running. We built on the fly the Micro-Frontends, and we had a database with the size of each Micro-Frontends, and we allow a threshold to increase a bit because maybe you add a new library, but if it's 10 kilobyte, who cares? If it's half a megabyte, it's a different ballpark. And therefore, if you're capable to pass that thing straight away while you are waiting for merging this thing, you can merge. Otherwise, there was an error that tells you, no, you need to review your budget size. And sometimes it was legit. So they need to obviously to speak with the principal engineer team and community and say, listen, we need to this library that is larger than this, so you need to increase in the centralized place what is our budget size. Yeah. But these kind of approaches is what they make successful Micro-Frontends implementation or distributed system implementation, like updating libraries across Micro-Frontends, another classic problem. If you use Dependabot, you just have like a PR that is coming straight away every night, and you come back in the office the day after or remotely, and you see the PR, you check what is the libraries bump up, and it's easier to handle more than coordinating the deployment of a new library across multiple teams. What you really want when you're doing distributed system is being in the room without being in the room. And those kind of activities of governance became pivotal for reaching maturity in Micro-Frontends. Obviously, you cannot think all of them straight away day one, but it's a journey that you need to go through. And some of them are more critical than others. Yeah. Even deployment, for instance, I remember vividly, if you think about that, majority of the deployments are big bang deployments with feature flags, but there are better ways to do that through canary release blue-green deployments. And it's something that people often don't think about, but I have creating this safe net for developers, as I call it, move my teams, and my department was like roughly 550 people overall in 4 different dev centers. There were some teams that were deploying 20 times per day when we started to have this, because they could say with the configuration, I wanted my Micro-Frontend, this new version is available only for Chrome, only in Switzerland, 5% of the traffic. And they can test in production if they changes on, in this case, what the video player could have the impact that they assume. And if not, the rollback, it wasn't redeploying something, it was just changing the configuration and everything was working. This mindset approach for developers was great because they said, okay, before I need to test going through a massive project, passing through the change advisory board that was pretty much useless, and so on, for reaching velocity, while I enabled them to make changes live without affecting our users, without feature flags and coordinating feature flags that you need to add code, remove code, and majority of the time we all know that old feature flags will remain there, and in a very simple way, and every team was independent. Some teams deployed 25 per day, sometimes others were deploying once per month, and it was okay because every team was independent.
And that basically increased the efficiency,
incredible. Because if you there is a study in the book Accelerate that was written, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, where they went and analyzed 200 companies worldwide and what are the traits of the best one and what are the traits of the worst one. When we come up with the idea of DORA metrics. So in DORA metrics, you have a bunch of KPIs, like how often do you deploy in production? How fast I have an idea, and how fast I can reach production. And if I deploy in production, how often I fail to deploy, and how fast I can recover from that. And all these metrics put together, if you start to increase the throughput, so reaching the fast flow, reducing the errors on deployment, and therefore the rollback, you reach a moment where your teams can simply deploy, no matter if it's Friday evening at 6 p.m. or not, because they have a safe net to roll back the issue quickly. Even if you are on call, for us, we were live sports streaming, and if you have like the Champions League final or the Super Bowl, you cannot have an error in production that sticks around for more than 1 minute or 2, because otherwise people start to complain.
Absolutely.
And therefore, these things were nailed and polished to death because it was extremely important that these kind of things were working. And that's why I was so obsessed on the CI/CD part that turns out to be a key asset for the success of the platform and the architecture. Because if you pair a good design with a strong engineering culture, this one, and then you design the teams around this stuff, then yes, Micro-Frontends and any distributed system will work nicely.
Nice, that's amazing. So I want to delve into like the Micro-Frontends or module federation to be specific. So in your talk, one of your previous talks, you talked about like the app shell in
Yes.
general. Like, and then you talked about like the DOM and then the smart app shell. Like, do you want to expand a little bit on
Yeah,
that?
so Micro-Frontends, let's say the foundational part of Micro-Frontends are quite simple. So in client-side rendering or server-side rendering, you have like this called application shell. This is the first thing that you load. Now, on the server side can be different, depends from the framework that you want to use. There are certain companies that I work with that maybe are using Java in the backend, so they are not let's say end-to-end JavaScript system, and therefore they want to use maybe something like HTMX or other frameworks for rendering the UI. So there, for instance, the trick is instead of having an application shell that is slightly more, if you want, smart, intelligent, you use an UI composer that is taking a template and calling a bunch of APIs that return HTML fragments and compose everything and job done. But in application shell, if you do client-side rendering or you're using, I don't know, Next or Astor.js, whatever, you have basically a smart system that takes care about routing, so between pages, usually first level URL only. That's very important because that basically enables you to say, okay, there is the catalog, my front end, or meta shell, that is another concept we discussed later, or you are moving to, I don't know, my account, whatever it is. Then it takes care about composing. So I need to load this stuff and make sure that there are no potential issues or clashes between libraries. That's the other thing. Those are the main things. Then you have authentication. Some companies are using authentication applied at the application shell. There is a couple of interesting approaches. Either you do on the API layer, so every request you just check on the edge, or you can override the fetch or a HTTP request API and appending basically the token. So you centralize the refresh access token on the application shell. So the token is already there, and each Micro-Frontend will just make a normal fetch call or whatever framework they use, and they will find in the header already the bearer token.
Yeah.
And that will work straight away. The meta shell is an interesting concept. There are some companies that work with multiple Micro-Frontends in the same view. The problem they have is that they try to squeeze inside the application shell. But that basically you are leaking the domain on how the page is composed. So if you make a change on the position of Micro-Frontends, reducing or augmenting the Micro-Frontends, the application shell needs to know and it has to be deployed. It's a big problem because the application shell, if we introduce a bug potentially, it will affect the entire system. While if you create a meta shell, it's basically a meta shell is a tiny layer that you can use either for composing multiple Micro-Frontends in the same view, and what it does is literally saying composing the way that you want is owned by one of the team that are building these Micro-Frontends, and the only thing is just positioning different Micro-Frontends in this meta shell. That's pretty much it. The beauty of this approach is that the application shell remain extremely clean because it's just route to, I don't know, catalog, and maybe there is a meta shell there that takes care about doing the sub-routing or whatever you want to do there, but the ideal is just composition and sub-routing inside the second level URL onwards. And this approach is extremely clean because now you basically have a chunk of system owned by the teams that are working together. Because the thing is, we want to reduce external dependency. We don't want to eliminate external dependency. This is a very important distinction people forget. And it's not because you're doing distributed system, you are living in the silos and therefore you do whatever you want. It's not playground for developers here. We are creating something, a cohesive system that is capable to work together and enables teams to express themselves. But the things that we learned in the past, that has not to be trashed. We need still to communicate. We still have a bit of governance. We still have to think about how I can simplify the life of my colleagues. Because it's not just, oh, I have my Micro-Frontend and forget the rest of the system. You are part of the system. So it's very important thinking about this part. So the application shell is the critical part that you build. Then after that, you have multiple Micro-Frontends that you can lazy load. But certain times you can also have shared libraries that very often I've seen this anti-pattern where people start to say, oh, but we have Micro-Frontends, we load everything at runtime, even libraries. That is dangerous to a certain extent because if you screw up a library, it has the same cascade effect of an application shell. So you want to have certain things that are stable. Then, therefore, if you instead create a library that vast majority of the time are, I don't know, analytics, login library, design system, those are not changing every day. Maybe are changing once a month, maybe every other week, wherever it is, maybe less. And you can use NPM packages, and you can use Dependabot for updating that across the different Micro-Frontends. And it will work like a charm. But the beauty of this approach is the developer can pick up the potential breaking change straight while they are developing, not at runtime. Because the problem with runtime is also promotional artifact across the multi-environments. Because you can work in pre-prod.
Yeah.
Maybe in prod it doesn't, because there is a library that we forget about, and no one thought that would break everything. So therefore, you need to create, when you are thinking about what you want to load at runtime, what's not, it has to be intentional. There are some thought behind that. It's not because, oh, it's cool doing everything at runtime, we do everything at runtime.
Yeah.
Is dangerous. And at the same time, you need to be intentional on understanding how to split things. It's very important that you don't over-index on Micro-Frontends because you have the runtime story. For instance, in Module Federation, you were talking about that. You have this idea of omnidirectionality. I can share from the host some UI, and vice versa, the remote can share some stuff. That is dangerous. It's something that I don't recommend, because we have learned in the hard way back in the days. I was a Flash developer back in the days, and we didn't have like the variety of frameworks that we have right now in JavaScript. And there I built, I don't know how many MV star frameworks. MVC, MVVM, MVP, all of them. And you realize that after a period of time, the controller became bidirectional, despite it shouldn't. And the view model became bidirectional heavily. And you start to put stuff that should be on the model, but because it's easier to put in the controller or the presenter or the body view model, it's an issue. Therefore, you want to foster these things in the right way. So therefore, sometimes leaning back towards good practice we have learned in the past can help you to express certain things properly way more than, oh, it's cool doing everything at runtime, let's do everything at runtime.
Yeah. I have a question around like CSS first in Micro-Frontends, and I've heard it's notoriously difficult to get it working right. Like, what's your advice or approach in that area?
The most simplest approach, in my opinion, is creating suffix on different domains. I think it was in the first edition of my book, I made an example where I was using Material UI for React, where basically you can have a seed property that you can define in each single Micro-Frontends, where that will be used suffix. The cool thing of this is that you don't have clashing on the CSS styles, but you might risk to have a lot that you need to remove every time that you create, because otherwise they will just add. So that is something that you can clean. There are certain frameworks of Micro-Frontends, like single SPA, for instance, that enables you to have lifecycle methods. Like if you are about to, let's say, be unloaded, you can do certain things. And we were using, in my previous company, with single SPA was there, but it was very early stages. So therefore, I basically reintegrate this idea of lifecycle. That was great. I know Zach Jackson from Module Federation is doing similar things, is thinking about that, because it's something that is super cool. And that is another approach that you can use. Otherwise, Tailwind enables you to segregate very nicely the CSS. Talking with people from Vercel were telling me that they were using that for the Micro-Frontends. It was a good approach. But in general, they all go, because you have to remember when you build Micro-Frontends, is when a user goes to a website or a web application, they're not going to load every single page. They're going to load specific things that they want to go. If you go to Amazon.com, you go for specific things. You probably load the catalog, and probably you could load this page detail. You don't go in my account orders every time. Therefore, you are not going to load that. So even if you have a bit of overhead on CSS styles, it's not going to harm people in general. So that is a good approach. And majority of the frameworks out there, if you don't want to do in a framework that doesn't allow you, you can use post-CSS or any other, let's say, approach with the bundler level that enables you to do prefix, suffix, or whatever it is.
That's really nice. I think like Tailwind is also something like you mentioned on Touchdown that is very popular as well. And that's nice. You touched on your book, which is like your book published by O'Reilly.
Yes.
Like Micro-Frontends.
Yes.
Like, do you want to tell me why you wrote that book and what drove you to actually write the book?
Yes, so the first edition I wrote because in 2019 I found myself with a lot of interest around Micro-Frontends, but a lot of people were challenging the approach. Starting from big names like Dan Abramov wrote a post on, I don't understand Micro-Frontends. And I was pulled by the community to say, Luca, can you reply on that? So I wrote an article on that was visualized by almost 70,000 people in just a month. And that told me already there is something here. Then I started to write a lot of articles about Micro-Frontends on Medium. Every single article was like having a lot of interest. So what I did at the end was say, listen, I want to publish with O'Reilly. I published already a book before this one. It was Front-End Reactive Architecture for A-Press, but this one I wanted to do with O'Reilly because I think it was a topic for O'Reilly. After, let's say, 6 months, I was able to convince them. In July 2019, I started. It took me 2 years to write the first edition, and the response was overwhelming, to be honest. It was bestseller in several Amazon shops. And then 4 years later, they asked me to write again, to do a second edition if I have enough material. So I revamped completely the book. I updated 7 chapters, removed 2, added 5, added the AI part. And basically, the new book currently is available since mid-November 2025. It's already like bestseller in a few places, like I saw in Brazil, in Italy, and a few other places. There is still a lot of interest, and I think now there is also the maturity to understand it better in the front-end community because more people started to socialize better this idea. Some of people are still afraid to use them. Some others are just, they never tried for jumping to conclusion without thinking about that. But my idea is mainly to, you don't become rich writing books on tech, but you socialize a lot concepts and you enable a lot of companies. And for me, these books open a lot of doors that I was able to speak with people that I would never be able to, thanks to the book and the content that is written there.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Like, I know you have a talk today as well.
Yes.
Like, I was like speaking at conferences as well, kind of helped.
It was extremely helpful. The first edition of the book, basically I built from the question that I receive in conferences. So I remember vividly I have a spreadsheet where I collect all the questions I had every single time, either on the online event or in person. And then I cluster the question, and the chapter of the book were coming from the question that I receive all the time. And for me, it became like very interesting to see the problem that let's say the companies and the people attending talks and conferences were asking me, because then I know where to what was my next move. Sometimes was okay, optimization, CSS, whatever it is. And then I started to build content around that. And slowly but steadily, I have like these, let's say, plenty. I think I deliver hundreds of talks worldwide on Micro-Frontends now on different topics, and every single them I capitalize on the discussion I had with people and improve the talk. And that for me was fantastic because I became more confident that I've seen a lot of stuff. People were coming with all the most interesting and weird curveballs that I've seen in my career. But for me, it was a moment of growth and also thinking differently about these topics.
Nice, amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been very interesting talking with you.
Thank you.
Like, I just want to ask one last question before we end. Basically, what's that one thing that we should be looking out for from you?
Wow, that's a challenging one. I started to do the videography, so now I have a YouTube channel. I'm doing a lot of talks around not only Micro-Frontends, but also software architecture, also content creation. Those are the 3 topics I cover. And I started to use more video as a media because I've seen, let's say, new generation are more closer to that than writing.
Yeah, true.
So I'm trying to mix and match. But the one thing that I really want to do next year in 2026 will be a webinar series on Micro-Frontends where it will be more hands-on, where I can guide people across 4 hours webinars on building Micro-Frontends, either client-side rendering or server-side rendering, designing Micro-Frontends, stuff like that. I ran a survey. I received like 300 people from different companies worldwide answering what they would like to see on those webinars. So 2026 will be my launch year of this webinar series.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that will be a game changer, and it will be
I hope.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luca.
Thank you.
It's nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Awesome.